The book of Judith, chapter 1. It was the 12th year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, who reigned in the great city of Nineveh. In those days, Arphaxad, who reigned over Medes in Ecbatana, built a wall around Ecbatana of hewn stones, which were 3 cubits wide and 6 cubits long. He made the wall 70 cubits high and 50 cubits wide. At its gates he set its towers 100 cubits high and 60 cubits wide. At their foundations he made its gates, raised to 70 cubits high and 40 cubits wide, for the marching of his mighty armies and his infantry in battle array. In those days, King Nebuchadnezzar waged war against King Arphaxad in the great plain, the plain in the region of Regau, and all those who inhabited the hill country and all those who lived along the Euphrates, the Tigris, and the Hydaspes rallied to him, including those from the plain of Arioch, king of the Elamites. Many nations of the sons of Chaldea gathered in battle array. Then Nebuchadnezzar, the Assyrian king, sent envoys to all those dwelling in Persia, to all living in the west, and to those who dwelled in Cilicia, Damascus, Lebanon, and anti-Lebanon, and to those who lived on the seacoast, and to those who dwelled in the nations of Carmel and Gilead and Upper Galilee, and those and the great plain of Esdraelon, and to all those in Samaria and its cities, and beyond the Jordan as far as Jerusalem, Bethany, Kalaus, and Kadesh, and the river of Egypt, and to Tahpanhes and Ramesses, and the whole land of Goshen, even beyond Tanis and Memphis, and to all the inhabitants of Egypt as far as the boundaries of Ethiopia. But all those who lived in that area scorned the summons of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the Assyrians, who refused to join with him in the war because they were not afraid of him. They regarded him as but one man, and they sent his messengers away empty-handed and dishonored. Then Nebuchadnezzar was extremely angry with all that land, and swore by his throne and his kingdom that he would take vengeance on all the regions of Cilicia and Damascus and Syria, that he would slay with the sword all the inhabitants of the land of Moab and the sons of Ammon and all Judea and all those in Egypt as far as the borders of the 2 seas. So in his 17th year he marched with his army against King Arphaxad and defeated him in battle. He routed the whole army of Arphaxad and all his cavalry and all his chariots. He ruled over his cities. Then he came to Ecbatana and took over its towers and plundered its marketplaces and put its adornments to shame. he captured Ephraxad in the mountains of Regau and ran him through with his spears, totally destroying him that day. Then he returned, he and all his sundry multitude of great many warriors. They rested there and feasted sumptuously for 120 days. Chapter 2. In the 18th year of the 22nd day of the first month in the house of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the Assyrians, it came about, there was talk that it was time to take vengeance on all the land, just as he had said. So he summoned all his officers and all his nobles and laid out verbally all the wickedness of the land. They determined to destroy everyone who had not obeyed his summons. When he finished his plan, Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, called Holofernes, the chief captain of his army, second in command to him. He said to him, "Thus says the great king, the Lord of all the earth, behold, you shall go out from my presence and take men confident in their strength with you, 120,000 foot soldiers and 12,000 cavalry, march against all the land and march against all the land of the west, because they disobeyed my commands. You shall order them to prepare the earth and water, for I will come out in wrath, and I will cover the whole face of the land with footprints of my army, and I will give them over to my army as plunder. Their wounded will fill the valleys, and their brooks and rivers shall be overflowing with their dead. I will lead them away as captives to the end of the whole earth. And going out ahead of me, you shall seize all their territory. They will surrender themselves to you, and you shall hold them for me until the day of their punishment. Against the ones who refuse, let your eye not spare them, and give them over to slaughter and plunder throughout all your territory. For as I live, and by the power of my kingdom, what I have spoken, I will do by my hand. Take heed and do not transgress any of these orders of your Lord, but carry them out fully just as I have commanded you, and do it without any delay." So Holofernes went out from the presence of his Lord and called all the generals, captains, and officers to the Assyrian army, and as the Lord commanded him to do, he mobilized 120,000 select men for the battle, together with 12,000 archers on horseback, and he set them in formation as any great army is organized in time of war. He brought a great number of camels, donkeys, and mules to transport their baggage, innumerable sheep, goats, and oxen for their food supply, ample provisions for every man, and a great quantity of gold and silver from the king's palace. He marched out with his entire army to go in advance of Nebuchadnezzar the king, to cover the entire face of the land to the west with their chariots, cavalry, and their select infantry. And along with them went a great mixed crowd, like a swarm of locusts, like the dust of the earth, so the multitude could not be numbered. And they went out from Nineveh 3 days' journey to the plain of Bechteleth, and they camped over against Bechteleth near the mountain to the left of Upper Cilicia. Then he took his entire army, his infantry, the cavalry, and his chariots, and went from there to the hill country. And he ravaged Put and Lud, and he plundered all the Rasacites and the Ishmaelites along the desert towards the south of the Chaldeans. Then he followed the Euphrates and passed through Mesopotamia, destroying all the fortified cities along the river Abron until he came to the sea. He captured the region of Cilicia and killed everyone who resisted him, and came as far as the southern borders of Japheth, opposite Arabia. He encircled all the Midianites and torched their tents and plundered their sheepfolds. Next he marched down to the plain of Damascus at the time of the wheat harvest and burned all their fields, destroying their livestock, destroying their flocks and herds. He sacked their cities, ravaged their lands, and struck down all their youths with the edge of the sword. Thus fear and dread of him came upon all the inhabitants of the sea-coast at Sidon and Tyre, and those living in Sur and Osina, and all those living in Jamnia, those residing in Azutus and Ashkelon, also greatly feared him. Chapter 3. They sent messengers to him to sue for peace, saying, Behold, we are servants of Nebuchadnezzar the great king, lie prostrate before you. Do not do to us as pleasing in your sight. Behold, all our dwellings all our land, all our fields of wheat, our flocks and herds, and all our tents are before you, to do with them as you desire. Behold, our cities and their inhabitants are your slaves. Come and deal with them as you see fit. Come and deal with them as is fitting in your sight. These men came to Holofernes and reported all these things to him. He went down to the seacoast with his army and stationed garrisons over the fortified cities and selected chosen men from them as allies. These people and all their surrounding countryside received him with garlands and dancing and timbrels, but he destroyed all their borders and cut down their sacred groves, for he had been given orders to demolish all gods of the land. So all the nations would worship Nebuchadnezzar only, and so all their tongues had their tongues and tribes would call upon him as God. Then he came to Esdraelon near Dothan, facing the great ridge of Judea. He camped between Geba and Scythopolis and remained there for a month to bring together all the supplies for his army. Chapter 4. When the Israelites residing in Judea heard everything Holofernes, the commander of Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, had done to the nations, and how he stripped and demolished all their temples, they were greatly terrified at his presence. They were troubled for Jerusalem and also for their temple of the Lord their God, for they had just recently come back from exile, and all of the people of Judea had only recently been regathered, and the holy vessels, the altar, and the temple had been consecrated, having been profaned. So they sent word into all the region of Samaria and Dakona, Beth, Horon, Belman, and Jericho, and Koba, and Isora, and to the valley of Salem. Immediately they seized all the hilltops and fortified the villages in them and stored up provisions in preparations for war. Having just harvested their fields, Joachim, the high priest who was in Jerusalem at the time, wrote to those dwelling in Bethulia and Betomestam, which faces Esdraelon, opposite the plain near Dothan. He ordered them to occupy the mountain passes, since Judea could be invaded through them. They were easy to defend because the approach was narrow, with space for only 2 men at the most to pass. With space only for 2 men at most to pass. The Israelites did as instructed by Joachim the high priest and the council of all the people of Israel which met in Jerusalem, and all the men of Israel cried to God with great fervor and humbled themselves in great somberness. They, their wives and children, their cattle, and all the strangers, the hired servants, and the purchased slaves, put sackcloth around their waists, all the men of Israel, and the women and the children living in Jerusalem prostrated themselves before the temple, and put ashes on their heads, and spread out their sackcloth before the face of the Lord. They also covered the altar with sackcloth and cried out fervently with one accord to the God of Israel that he would not allow their infants to be prey and their wives to be seized, that the cities they inherited not be destroyed, that their sanctuary not be desecrated, and be a reproach to the gloating of the Gentiles. The Lord heard their cry and looked down on their affliction, for the people were fasting many days in all Judea and Jerusalem before the sanctuary of the Lord Almighty. And Joachim the high priest and all the priests who stood before the presence of the Lord and served the Lord, having girded their waists with sackcloth, offered their continual whole burnt offerings and the freewill offerings of the people with ashes on their turbans. With all their strength they cried out to the Lord to look with favor upon all the house of Israel. Chapter 5. It was told to Holofernes, the commander of the Assyrian army, that the Israelites were prepared for a war and had blocked the passes in the mountains, fortified all the hilltops, and placed barricades in the plains. He was very angry, and he called all the princes of Moab and the captains of Ammon and all the governors of the seacoast together. He said to them, "Tell me, sons of Canaan, who are these people who live in the hill country? What cities do they inhabit? How large is their army? In what does their power and strength consist? And who is the king who rules them and leads their army? Why have they alone refused to come and meet with me along all those dwelling in the area, all those dwelling in the west?" Then Achior, the leader of the Ammonites, said to him, "Let my lord hear the word that comes from the mouth of your servant, and I will tell you the truth concerning this people who dwell in this hill country near you. No falsehood will come out of the mouth of your servant. These people are descended from the Chaldeans. They previously sojourned in Mesopotamia because they did not wish to follow the gods of their fathers who were in Chaldea. for they had departed from their way of their ancestors and worshipped the God of heaven, the God they had come to know. As a result, they cast them out from the presence of their gods, and they fled to Mesopotamia and sojourned there for a long time. Then their God commanded them to depart from the place of their sojourn and go to the land of Canaan. They settled there and became very wealthy in gold, silver, and abundant livestock. But when a famine spread through all of Canaan, they went down into Egypt and sojourned there as long as there was food. And there they became a great multitude, so great they could not be numbered. Then the king of Egypt rose against them, and taking advantage of them, forced them to make bricks. He humbled them and made them into slaves. So they cried out to their God, and he struck the whole land of Egypt with deadly plagues. The Egyptians cast them out from their presence. So God dried up the Red Sea before them. He led them by way of Sinai and Kadesh Barnea, and they drove out all those living in the desert. They settled in the land of the Amorites, and by their strength they utterly destroyed all the residents of Heshbon, and crossing over the river Jordan, they occupied the hill country. Then they drove out the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Shechemites, and the Girgasites, and they dwelled there for a long time. If they did not sin before their God, they prospered, because their God, who hates sin, was with them. But they strayed from the path which he prescribed for them. They were destroyed in numerous battles, and they were exiled to a land not their own. And the temple of their God was brought down to the ground, and their cities were seized by their adversaries. Yet now they have come back to their God and returned from their dispersion, and they have taken back Jerusalem, where their sanctuary is. They have not settled in the hill country, for it was not inhabited. Now, my Lord and Master, if there is any sin of ignorance in this people, and they sin against their God, then we will identify their offense and will go up to defeat them. But if there is no lawlessness in their nation, then let my Lord leave them alone, lest their Lord shield them and their God defend them, and we will become a reproach before the whole earth. Now when Achior finished speaking these things, all the people standing around the tent started to grumble. Then Holofernes's officials and all those dwelling in the sea coast and Moab insisted Achior be put to death. They said, "We will not be afraid of the Israelites, for behold, they are a people in whom there is no might nor the power to wage war. Now therefore we will go up, Lord Holofernes, and they will be devoured by your whole army." Chapter 6. As the disruption of the men outside the council calmed down, Holofernes, the Assyrian army commander, spoke to Achior in the presence of all the crowd of foreigners and to all the sons of Moab. "Who are you, Achior, and your mercenaries of Ephraim, to prophesy among us as you did today, to tell us we should not wage war against the Israelite people, because their God will shield them? Who is God besides Nebuchadnezzar? He will send his power and will utterly destroy them from the face of the earth, and their God will not deliver them. Rather, we, the servants of the king, will strike them down as one man. They will not withstand our strength, the strength of our cavalry. We will subdue them with it. Their high hills will be drunk with their blood, and their plains will be filled with their blood, with their bodies. Their footprints will perish no long will their footprints will no longer remain, but they will utterly perish, says King Nebuchadnezzar, Lord of all the earth. It is he who has spoken. None of his words will be in vain. But you, O Achior, and your mercenaries of Ammon, who spoke these words in the day of your wrongdoing, you will not see my face from this day forth until the time I punish these people who came up out of Egypt, when I return the sword of my forces and of my servants will pass through your sides, and you will fall among their wounded men. Now my servants will take you back to the hill country, and they will put you in one of the cities of the hill, and will put you in one of the cities of the hill passes. You will not die until you perish alongside them. And if you really suppose in your heart that they will not be taken by us, then do not be downcast. I have spoken, and no word of mine shall fail. Now Holofernes commanded his servants who were standing by his tent to capture him, to capture Achior and remove him to Bethulia and turn him over to the sons of Israel. Then the servants took hold of him and led him outside the camp toward the plain. They traveled from the plain into the hill country to the springs below Bethulia. When the men of the city saw them, they took up their weapons and hurried out of the city to the crest of the mountain. The slingers kept the servants from ascending by hurling stones at them. Taking shelter down at the base of the mountain, they tied up Achior and left him at the foot of the mountain, and went back to their master. When the Israelites went down from their dwelling, they found and loosed him and brought him to Bethulia. They set him before the leaders of the city, who in those days were Uzziah the son of Micah of the tribe of Simeon, Cabris the son of Gothanel, and Garmis the son of Malchiel. They summoned all the city elders and all their young men, and the women rushed to the assembly, and they set Achior in the midst of all the people. Uzziah asked him what had happened. He reported to them the events of the council of Holofernes and all the many words he had spoken in the midst of the Assyrian officials, and all that Holofernes arrogantly boasted against the house of Israel. Then the people fell down and worshipped God and cried out, saying, O Lord God of heaven, look down upon their arrogance and have mercy on the humble state of our people. Look with favor upon those who are sanctified unto you this day. Then they encouraged Achior and praised him exceedingly. Then Uzziah took him from the assembly to his house and gave a feast for the elders. And all that night they called upon the God of Israel for help.